Racist female cop punches black elderly man, unaware his son is a police captain. In this shocking and emotional story, an elderly black man, Harold Thompson, is assaulted by a racist female police officer in broad daylight, unaware that his son is the police captain. The incident ignites a firestorm of protests and social media outrage as it reveals the dark underbelly of racial profiling and police brutality in our society. This powerful narrative shows the devastating impact of prejudice and the long-standing fight for justice and equality within the police system. Watch as tensions rise when Captain Marcus Thompson arrives to confront the officer who attacked his father. This gripping story is packed with drama, heart-stopping moments, and hard-hitting questions. Can one family's fight for justice spark real change in the system? What happens when those sworn to protect abuse their power? What if an officer's reckless action reveals not only prejudice, but also deep-rooted systemic problems within the force? It was a bright Tuesday afternoon, and the streets of Millbrook felt alive. Vendors lined the sidewalk, children played nearby, and life moved along in the small, tightly knit community. But for 70-year-old Harold Thompson, this day would be anything but ordinary. It would be a day that tested not only his dignity, but also his family's resolve. Could an ordinary day truly erupt into chaos? What happens when you're judged not by your actions, but by the color of your skin? And how far can unchecked authority go when no one is watching? Harold was a kind man, well-loved in the neighborhood. He had a warm smile that could soften even the toughest of hearts. But in this story, smiles wouldn't matter, because his was about to be erased by someone with a badge, a uniform, and a dangerous bias. The incident started innocently enough. Harold walked his usual route to the local grocery store to pick up milk and bread for his wife. He moved slower than he used to, the weight of age in his steps, but he enjoyed the brief exchanges with neighbors and the peace of being outdoors. Today, though, something felt off. As he walked, he noticed a police cruiser parked at the corner, its lights off but its engine humming. Why was that officer watching him? Had he done something wrong? Is this how life works for a black man, even in his golden years? Harold shook off the unease and continued on his way. Just as he crossed the street, a voice called out, sharp and commanding. "Hey, you! Stop right there!" The voice belonged to Officer Karen Williams, a 34-year-old cop with a reputation for being tough. Too tough, some would say. She'd been with the department for 5 years, long enough to develop a certain edge, long enough to have lost the empathy that might have once existed beneath her badge. But today, her edge wasn't just about authority, it was about prejudice. Harold froze, startled. He turned slowly, a confused look on his face. What did she want with him? Why was this officer singling him out? "Do you live around here?" Officer Williams barked, her hand resting casually on the gun at her hip. She sized him up, eyes narrowing. To her, Harold wasn't a 70-year-old man out for groceries. He was a threat. Why? Because of the color of his skin. Harold, ever the gentleman, kept his voice calm. "Yes, ma'am. Just going to the store. I live right down the block." But his politeness wasn't enough. Officer Williams wasn't interested in explanations. She approached him with hostility in her stride, her fingers twitching as though itching for confrontation. Why did her demeanor change? Why does the very sight of a black man walking peacefully raise suspicion? "You match the description of someone we're looking for," she lied, not caring to check her facts. The truth was, she saw an elderly black man and assumed guilt. She didn't ask his name. She didn't question his intentions. She simply assumed the worst. "I'm just going to the store," Harold repeated, his voice shaking slightly, unsure how this had escalated so quickly. And that's when it happened, the moment that would forever change everything. In a flash of anger and irrational fear, Officer Williams stepped closer, invading his personal space, and without warning, she swung. What drives a person in power to violence? How many more must fall victim to unchecked authority? Her fist connected with Harold's chest, hard and deliberate. The elderly man stumbled back, shock and pain clouding his senses. He clutched at his chest, gasping for breath, while nearby witnesses screamed in horror. How could this be happening? The officer, filled with misguided self-righteousness, was about to escalate things further when a voice boomed from behind her. "Officer Williams, stand down!" She froze, and for a brief moment, the street fell silent. Every eye turned toward the source of the command. Walking briskly toward them was Captain Marcus Thompson, Millbrook's police captain, and Harold's son. What happens when the tables turn? What does a cop do when they realize they've attacked the wrong person, the father of their superior? Captain Thompson had been on his way to lunch when he saw the commotion from his car. His heart sank when he recognized the figure on the ground. It was his father. And the officer assaulting him? One of his own. Anger rippled through Captain Thompson, but he had to stay composed. As a black man in a position of authority, he knew the weight his every move carried. But this was personal. His father was hurt, and one of his officers had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. How do you confront injustice when it's so close to home? "Officer Williams," he said, his voice low but commanding, "you've just made a terrible mistake."
If you've watched this far, comment which country you're watching from and leave a 100 in the comment section because you are type of person that likes to finish what they started. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to get notified whenever we drop new videos. Now back to the story.
Officer Williams, her face pale, took a step back. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. This wasn't just some random elderly man. This was the father of her captain, the very man who controlled her career. What happens when guilt and fear collide? I didn't know, she stammered, her hand still on her gun, though she no longer had any intention of using it. "You didn't know?" Captain Thompson's voice was cold. "That doesn't matter. What matters is you just assaulted an innocent man, my father. How do you rebuild trust when it's shattered like glass? What happens when the people who are supposed to protect turn against you?" The crowd that had gathered watched in stunned silence. Tension filled the air as Captain Thompson knelt beside his father, checking him over. Harold, still shaken but conscious, gave his son a weak smile. "I'm all right, Marcus," he whispered. "Just a little shaken." But Captain Thompson wasn't all right. He was furious. Furious at the system that allowed officers like Williams to act with impunity. Furious that his own father had been a victim of the very force he led. But most of all, he was furious because this wasn't an isolated incident. This was part of a larger, darker truth, one that black men and women lived with every day. How do you fight a system from within? How do you change what seems so deeply entrenched? Captain Thompson stood, his decision made. Officer Williams would face consequences, severe ones. But this wasn't just about her. This was about a system that allowed officers to act on their biases, to wield their power with reckless abandon. He would make sure change came, even if it cost him everything. In the days that followed, Officer Williams was suspended, pending investigation. The story of what happened that day spread through the media, igniting protests, discussions, and debates about racial profiling, police brutality, and the deep-seated issues that plagued not just Millbrook, but the country as a whole. But what does real change look like? Will this be just another story or the beginning of a larger movement? Captain Marcus Thompson vowed that his father's ordeal would not be forgotten. It became a rallying cry, not just for justice, but for reform within the police force. But can one man change a system? And what happens when the very institution meant to protect becomes the threat? As Harold Thompson healed, both physically and emotionally, he remained proud of his son. Proud that Marcus had chosen the hard road, the road of integrity, even when it would have been easier to turn away. And as for Captain Thompson, he knew this was just the beginning of a much longer fight. What will it take to bring justice? How many more voices need to speak out before true change happens? The fight was far from over. Kindly share your opinion. Let's see what you think.